You have been fed a sanitized hallucination of history. The textbooks tell you the British Empire was forged by gunpowder, naval superiority, and the ambition of queens. This is a lie. The blueprint for global domination did not come from a human mind. It was dictated, coordinate by coordinate, by a non-human intelligence speaking through a polished obsidian mirror in the late 16th century. Ignorance of this pact is dangerous. It blinds you to the invisible hierarchy that still governs your life, your government, and your currency. If you click away, you remain a battery for a system you cannot see. But if you stay, I will reveal the primary source documents that the Crown tried to bury. I will show you the spirit diaries of Dr. John Dee, where the specific instructions to conquer the globe were exchanged for something far darker than territory. We are about to open a cold case that spans 4 centuries. But before we look at the ritual, we must first identify the suspect. We need to strip away the stained glass propaganda and look at the forensic definition of an angel. Because what John Dee summoned was not a guardian, it was a governor. To properly excavate the occult history of the British Empire, we must first ruthlessly dismantle the Victorian fallacy of the angel. The modern mind, conditioned by centuries of sanitized Sunday school curriculum, envisions feathered, benevolent guardians. However, a forensic linguistic analysis of the ancient texts reveals a far more terrifying bureaucracy. The Hebrew term malach strictly translates to messenger, a functional administrative title devoid of moral alignment. It denotes a courier of cosmic law, not a friend to humanity. But when we cross-reference this with the Greek Gnostic texts, we encounter the term archon, meaning ruler or governor. These entities were never depicted as harp-playing seraphim in the primary sources. They were the complex, geometric intelligences that governed the planetary spheres. In the esoteric origins of geopolitics, this distinction is critical. The ancient Sumerians and Babylonians did not pray to these beings for forgiveness. They negotiated with them for power. The malach were the administrators of physics, the architects of drought and harvest, and the gatekeepers of knowledge that could elevate a city-state into a hegemony. We must observe the hierarchy with a cold, academic eye. The descriptions in the earliest manuscripts present these entities as terrifying wheels of fire, multi-faced chimeras, and burning eyes, descriptions that align more closely with high-dimensional geometry than humanoid biology. They operated on a transactional basis. This was not religion. This was the proto-science of contact. The survival of a kingdom depended on the king's ability to interpret the data provided by these messengers. The corruption of this understanding represents perhaps the single greatest cover-up in theological history. By softening the image of the malach into the guardian angel, the ecclesiastical authorities effectively disarmed the populace, hiding the reality that these beings were dangerous, potent forces that required strict, hazardous protocols to handle. This was not about faith. It was about the safety standards required for interacting with non-human intelligence. If we analyze the oldest fragments of the Semitic traditions, the interaction between the divine and the terrestrial was strictly legalistic. Covenants were contracts, blood was the signature. The entity provided the intelligence, the software for civilization, and the human agent provided the vessel. This is where the true history of power begins, not with armies, but with the solitary figure who dared to open the channel. This ancient definition posits the angel as a cosmic bureaucrat, a governor of reality who viewed humanity often with indifference, sometimes with hostility, but always with a rigid adherence to universal law. They were the custodians of the secret fire, the raw information required to manipulate matter and mind. To command them was to command the source code of reality itself. However, this operational relationship between the human ruler and the cosmic governor required a specific technology to function, a template of containment and negotiation that has been buried under the sands of the Middle East for millennia. To see how this contract was first signed, we must turn our attention to the first king who didn't just pray to these forces, but enslaved them to build his throne. If we strip away the sanitized allegories of the Old Testament, King Solomon emerges not merely as a wise judge, but as the archetype of the sorcerer king. He is the foundational figure for Solomonic demonology explained, establishing the dangerous precedent that true sovereignty requires the subjugation of spiritual entities. The construction of the first temple in Jerusalem serves as the primary crime scene for this investigation. Biblical texts explicitly state that no iron tool, no hammer, axe, or chisel was heard at the site during its construction. Mainstream history dismisses this as a metaphor for peace. Occult history identifies it as evidence of advanced, non-human technology. The Testament of Solomon, a text relegated to the apocryphal fringe, provides the operational manual for this impossible architecture. It describes Solomon receiving a ring from the archangel Michael, a device of binding engraved with the pentalpha. With this artifact, he did not hire laborers, he enslaved the jinn. These entities, creatures of smokeless fire, were compelled to quarry the massive stones and transport them with a physics that defied the rudimentary engineering of the Iron Age. The temple was not just a place of worship, it was a containment facility, built by the very forces it was designed to suppress. Central to this anomalous construction was the shamir, often described in rabbinic literature as a worm about the size of a barleycorn. It possessed the capability to split the hardest granite with precision, functioning more like a directed energy tool than a biological organism. The custody of the shamir was the ultimate state secret, a weapon of mass creation that allowed the king to reshape matter without physical exertion. This establishes the esoteric origins of geopolitics. The belief that the legitimacy of a ruler is determined by their possession of artifacts that can bridge the material and the ethereal. Solomon acted as the magician architect, a title that would later obsess figures like John Dee. The king was not merely a political figurehead, but the operator of a cosmic machine. He categorized the 72 spirits, later codified in the Ars Goetia, assigning them specific duties ranging from the teaching of astronomy to the locating of hidden treasures. This was a rigorous scientific classification of consciousness. The temple, therefore, was a massive talisman, a battery charged by ritual to anchor the presence of the divine, or the malach, onto the physical plane. The Solomonic template dictates that the state is a reflection of the heavens, and the king is the lens through which that reflection is focused. To rule the earth, one had to command the air. The treaties Solomon signed were not with neighboring human tribes, but with the principalities of the air. The peace of his reign was enforced by the threat of spiritual retaliation. It was a golden age forged in the fires of high ritual magic, where the boundary between the throne room and the ritual circle was non-existent. However, this centralization of occult power terrified the religious orthodoxy that followed. The idea that a human monarch could directly compel the forces of creation and destruction bypassed the need for a priestly middleman. It placed too much power in the hands of the individual. The temple stood as a testament to what humanity could achieve when partnering with the Watchers, but the knowledge of how to forge that partnership became a liability to the rising religious institutions. The machinery of the temple eventually fell, but the blueprints did not disappear, they were suppressed. To ensure that no future king could replicate Solomon's dominion over the spirits, a systematic campaign was launched to excise specific texts from the canon. The censors turned their eyes toward the most explosive manual of antediluvian history, a book that detailed exactly who taught humanity the arts of war and sorcery in the first place. The history of the canon is a history of censorship. The most egregious act of theological erasure occurred during the early councils of the Church, specifically the systematic redaction of the Archbook of Enoch from Western scripture. This was not a decision based on spiritual incoherence. It was a strategic move to conceal the origins of civilization itself. The Church Fathers, such as Tertullian, originally championed the text, but by the 4th century, it became radioactive. Why? Because the Book of Enoch does not describe sin as a moral failing of man, but as a technological transfer from the Watchers to humanity. It documents a celestial leak of classified information. The text details the descent of the Grigori, the Watchers, who landed on Mount Hermon. These were not vague spirits of temptation, they were instructors. The narrative explicitly states that they taught humanity the eternal secrets preserved in heaven. The suppression of this book was necessary to maintain the illusion that human progress is a result of human ingenuity or divine blessing. The Enochian account argues the opposite, that the tools of empire, weapons, strategy, and seduction are the direct result of an unauthorized intervention by non-human intelligence. we must examine the specific curriculum of this fallen university. The entity known as Azazel taught men to make swords of iron, and knives and shields and breastplates. This is the origin of the military-industrial complex. Before this intervention, conflict was primal. After the Watchers, it became industrialized warfare. The occult history of the British Empire cannot be understood without this context. The very steel used to forge the swords of conquerors was a gift from entities that rebelled against the throne of God. To wield the sword was to wield the technology of the fallen. Furthermore, the text details the teaching of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids. This seems trivial until one realizes it represents the birth of psychological warfare and the manipulation of desire. The Watchers introduced the concept of altering perception, of masking reality to influence the observer. Alongside this, Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, the foundation of pharmacology and ritual magic. They provided the hardware, weapons, and the software, magic, drugs, necessary to build a dominant state. By removing this text from the Bible, the developing orthodoxy successfully severed the link between the sins of civilization and their extraterrestrial origins. They wanted a narrative of human disobedience, Adam and Eve, not a narrative of alien corruption. If the populace knew that their kings used weapons designed by Azazel and their queens used cosmetics taught by the Watchers, the divine right of kings would look suspiciously like a pact with the opposition. The Book of Enoch remained hidden for centuries, preserved only in the Ethiopic tradition, buried like a time bomb, waiting for the archaeologists of the 18th and 19th centuries. Its absence from the Western mind allowed the Church to monopolize the supernatural. By erasing the Watchers, they erased the nuance of the spirit world, flattening the complex hierarchy of the cosmos into a simple binary of saint or devil. But erasing the text did not erase the entities. They remained active, embedded in the very fabric of the power structures they helped create. As the Church solidified its grip on Europe, it could no longer tolerate the idea of a neutral spirit or a teaching angel. To maintain control, they had to rebrand these ancient instructors, transforming the classical concept of the personal guide into something purely malevolent. The transition from the classical world to the medieval era was marked by a deliberate semantic weaponization, the linguistic shift from demon to demon. In the context of your Solomonic demonology, explained. This distinction is not merely academic, it is the mechanism of spiritual control. To the ancient Greeks, the demon was a value-neutral term indicating a guiding spirit or a divine spark, a localized intelligence that acted as an interface between the gods and men. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, openly attributed his wisdom to his personal demon, a voice that did not command him but dissuaded him from error. It was a relationship of mentorship, not possession. In Rome, this concept evolved into the genius. Every man had a genius, and the emperor possessed a genius so potent it required state worship. This entity was the externalization of one's higher potential, the invisible twin, that held the blueprint of an individual's destiny. This was a functional, accepted aspect of reality. To consult one's genius was a sign of sanity and strength. It implied that the human mind was capable of receiving direct transmission from the ether, without the need for an institutional filter. The rise of the monolithic church structure viewed this private channel as an existential threat. If a king or a philosopher could access divine intelligence directly through their demon, the priesthood became obsolete. To preserve the monopoly on the divine, the church engineered a hostile takeover of the spiritual spectrum. They eradicated the middle ground. The benevolent genius and the neutral demon were collapsed into the category of the demon, an agent of malice, serving the adversary. This theological surgery effectively criminalized private revelation. The voices that once guided the architects of antiquity were reclassified as symptoms of demonic possession or heresy. The Inquisition became the enforcement arm of this new reality, ensuring that any unauthorized contact with the invisible world was met with fire. They created a binary universe, absolute submission to the church or absolute damnation by the devil. The subtle, complex ecosystem of the Watchers and spirits was flattened into a battlefield of good versus evil. This forced the practice of high magic underground. The scholar who sought knowledge, not salvation, but raw data, was now operating in enemy territory. He could no longer casually converse with his genius. He had to summon, bind, and interrogate entities that the culture now defined as monsters. The rituals became defensive. The magician had to construct legalistic circles and blast protective names of God into the air, treating the entities not as teachers, but as radioactive materials that could kill upon contact. By the time of John Dee in the 16th century, this paranoia was the baseline of reality. Dee was a devout Christian, yet his intellect demanded answers that the Bible could not provide. To access the occult history of the British Empire, he had to bypass the church's firewall. He sought to contact the good angels, but the theology of his time offered no clear distinction between an angel and a demon. Once you stepped outside the approved liturgy, he was walking a razor's edge, risking both execution for heresy and the damnation of his soul. The suppression of the demon meant that any tool used to contact these beings had to be incredibly precise. There was no room for error. If the entities were indeed the dangerous archons of Gnosticism or the fallen watchers of Enoch, a simple prayer would not suffice. One needed a schematic, a map of the cosmic circuitry that could filter the signal and protect the receiver. This necessity for technical precision gave birth to the most complex ritual object of the Elizabethan age. To understand the operational mechanics of John Dee Enochian magic, we must turn our attention to the hardware. Housed within the British Museum is an artifact that defies the primitive superstition often attributed to the 16th century, the Sigillum Dei Ameth, or the Seal of God's Truth. This is not a religious icon meant for adoration. It is a piece of technical engineering constructed from pure beeswax 9 inches in diameter and slightly over an inch thick. To the untrained eye, it is an intricate carving. To the occult forensic analyst, it is a circuit board designed to ground and filter high-voltage spiritual contact. The geometry of the sigil is a masterclass in theological encryption. It features a heptagon within a heptagon, a structure deeply tied to the number 7, the number of the planetary governors, or archons. Inscribed upon its face are the names of God and the angels, but they are not written plainly. They are derived from a complex numerical matrix. The outer rim contains the names of 7 great angels, such as Zafkiel and Zadkiel, but to extract them, one must possess the cipher key. Dee and his scryer, Edward Kelly, did not arbitrarily choose these designs. They claim to receive the precise measurements and lettering instructions directly from the entities, pixel by pixel, in a laborious process of remote dictation. The function of the wax disc was specific. It was placed at the center of the holy table, directly supporting the Aztec obsidian mirror, or the crystal showstone. 4 smaller versions of the sigil were placed under the legs of the table, encased in protective cups. This configuration suggests an attempt to create an insulated environment, a spiritual Faraday cage. The beeswax acted as a dampener, an organic material capable of absorbing the static of the ritual space, while the geometry directed the flow of information. The setup was designed to isolate the scryer from terrestrial interference, ensuring that the signal received in the crystal was clean and uncorrupted by lower-level entities. Etched into the sigil are the Sons of Light and the Daughters of Light, arranged in a specific hierarchy. This was a map of the cosmos compressed into a physical object. The complexity suggests that the user was navigating a multidimensional territory where knowing the correct address, name, and protocol, sigil, was the difference between a successful transmission and a psychic casualty. It represents the pinnacle of the Western esoteric tradition, fusing the Kabbalistic understanding of divine names with the practical application of ritual tools. We must also consider the material itself. Why wax? In the theory of natural magic, wax is a fluid condenser, a material capable of holding an energetic charge, similar to how a magnetic tape holds data. By inscribing the holy names into the wax while it was soft, Dee was effectively programming the object. Once hardened, the sigil became a static battery of protection, radiating the authority of the names inscribed within it. It forced any entity approaching the table to acknowledge the hierarchy it represented. The Sigillum Dei Ameth proves that Dee's work was not the raving of a madman, but the meticulous labor of a mathematician applying the scientific method to the occult. He was building a machine. The table, the wax seals, the golden layman worn on his chest, and the ring, all were components of a cohesive system designed to breach the veil. This was the hardware of the operation, the physical infrastructure required to open a secure line to the angelic hierarchy. However, a computer without software is useless. The wax discs and the obsidian mirror were merely the receiver and the monitor. To actually dial out, to compel the entities to speak and reveal the secrets of Empire, Dee needed a language. He needed a syntax that predated humanity, a sonic key capable of vibrating the very air into a state of receptivity. With the hardware of the Sigillum Dei Ameth in place, we must examine the software, the angelical language, now known as Enochian. Skeptics dismiss the vocalizations of Edward Kelly as glossolalia, subconscious babble. However, modern cryptographers and linguists who have analyzed the surviving journals of Quincy John Dee face a disturbing anomaly. The language possesses a consistent grammar, syntax, and conjugation system that differs radically from English, Greek, or Hebrew. It is not a gibberish cipher. It is a fully functional linguistic system that exhibits a complexity often exceeding natural human languages. The entities claimed this was the language of creation itself, the very sonic code spoken by God to manifest light out of the void. The delivery method of this language suggests a high risk of cognitive contamination. The entities refused to dictate the words directly to Kelly, stating that the power inherent in the pronunciation would unleash forces they were not yet ready to control. Instead, they used a tedious safety-gapped method. The spirits pointed to letters on a complex grid, the tabula recensa, spelling the words backward. Dee would transcribe them in reverse, only reassembling the phonetic string later. This functioned as a dampening protocol, ensuring the spell was not activated during the download process. This was the safe handling of radioactive syntax. The core of this system lies in the 19 calls or keys. These are not prayers in the traditional sense. They do not plead. They are command strings. In the John Dee Enochian magic, the recitation of a call is the acoustic equivalent of entering a password into a mainframe. Each key is designed to open a specific ether or dimension, peeling back a layer of reality to allow the operator access to the governance of that sphere. The first key asserts the authority of the mage. The subsequent keys unlock specific geographic and elemental regions of the invisible world. It is a hierarchy of access, unlocking the universe gate by gate. The phonetic structure of Enochian is harsh, guttural, and rhythmic. Occult theory posits that the efficacy of these calls relies on barbarous names and specific vibrational frequencies. It connects to the ancient concept of cymatics, where sound organizes matter. If the universe is fundamentally vibrational, then the Enochian calls are an attempt to hack the waveform. Pronouncing the words correctly is said to alter the local atmospheric density, causing temperature drops and palpable shifts in pressure. It is a mechanical operation. Input the sound, output the phenomenon. Dee recorded these sessions with the meticulousness of a lab technician, noting the exact coordinates of the stars and the mood of the scryer. He understood that he was dealing with the Watchers and that the calls were the method by which they could be summoned to the stone. But unlike the solipsistic goals of modern occultists, Dee's objective was not personal enlightenment. He was trying to access the book of nature, the total knowledge of the world's resources, geography, and political destiny. The sheer volume of material generated, thousands of folios of grid tables and strange script, suggests a transmission of data that overwhelmed the receivers. The complexity of the Great Table of the Earth and the heptarchic royalty indicates a system of surveillance. The angels were providing Dee with a grid of the world, a way to view distant lands and understand the movements of foreign powers. This was remote viewing centuries before the term existed, powered by a linguistic technology that claimed to bypass time and space. However, this obsessive accumulation of data was not intended to remain in the library at Mortlake. Dee was the Queen's advisor, her eyes and ears. The ability to converse with non-human intelligences was immediately weaponized for statecraft. The magician and the spy master became indistinguishable, leading to a legendary signature that would echo into modern pop culture. It is a comfortable fiction of the modern age to believe that magic was a fringe activity practiced by hermits in caves, far removed from the halls of serious governance. The historical record proves the exact opposite. The occult was the incubator of the intelligence community. Nowhere is this more visible than in the figure of Kid John Dee, who served not only as Queen Elizabeth I's astrologer, but as her primary clandestine asset. The legendary code 007, immortalized by Ian Fleming, was not a 20th century invention. It was the personal insignia of John Dee, used in his confidential communique to the Queen. The symbol consisted of two circles, representing the eyes of the spy, or the all-seeing eye, and an elongated 7, a number of deep alchemical and Kabbalistic significance. To the uninitiated, it was a doodle. To the Crown, it meant for your eyes only. Dee's tenure establishes the occult history of the British Empire as a project of espionage from its inception. He coined the very term British Empire, British Empire, envisioning a maritime thalassocracy that would mirror the divine order. But to build this, he needed information. Under the guise of an itinerant scholar seeking alchemical manuscripts and conversations with angels, Dee traveled through the courts of Europe, Louvain, Paris, Prague, and Krakow. This was the perfect cover. While he was ostensibly discussing the Philosopher's Stone with Emperor Rudolf II, he was simultaneously gathering intelligence on the political machinations of the Holy Roman Empire and the Spanish threat. The intersection of magic and espionage goes deeper than field operations. It is rooted in the science of cryptography. Dee was a devotee of the abbot Trithemius and his work, Steganographia. On the surface, this text appeared to be a grimoire on how to summon spirits to carry messages over long distances. In reality, it was an advanced manual on cryptography and steganography, the art of hiding messages within plain text. The incantations were often cipher keys. The angels were the couriers. Thus, the birth of the British Secret Service, MI5, MI6, is inextricably linked to the practice of high magic. Both disciplines are obsessed with the same goal, the acquisition of hidden knowledge, occult, to gain leverage over a rival. This network played a pivotal role in the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. While historians credit English naval tactics and a fortuitous storm, the occult narrative suggests a deliberate ritual intervention. Dee had advised the Queen to hold her course, predicting the Protestant wind that would shatter the Catholic fleet. Whether one believes in weather magic, or simply that Dee's meteorological data was superior, the result was the same. The empire was saved by the man who stared into the obsidian mirror. The metaphysical and the geopolitical were fused. The ritual chamber was the situation room. The legacy of this union is that the intelligence agency is effectively a secularized occult order. It relies on compartmentalization, initiation degrees, clearance levels, hierarchy, and the hoarding of secrets, gnosis. The transition from the Elizabethan court to the modern deep state was a change in terminology, not methodology. The watcher became the asset. The scrying stone became the satellite. The desire to see without being seen remained the prime directive. We must debunk the idea that the Enlightenment killed magic. It merely drove it into the shadows of the bureaucracy. The men who built the foundations of Western hegemony were not secular rationalists. They were Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and Hermeticists who believed they were executing a divine plan. Dee's influence persisted through figures like Francis Bacon and into the Royal Society, embedding the occult DNA into the scientific revolution itself. But the story does not end with the Tudors. The lineage of psychic espionage went dormant in the public eye, only to resurface with terrifying validation in the 20th century. When the Cold War escalated, the superpowers did not mock Dee's methods, they attempted to industrialize them. The Black Mirrors of the 16th century were about to be replaced by the sterile laboratories of the military-industrial complex. The most disturbing revelation of the 20th century is not that the government suppressed the occult, but that they operationalized it. In the 1970s, facing the paranoia of the Cold War, the U.S. intelligence community, DIA and CIA, funded classified programs like Project Stargate at the Stanford Research Institute. The objective was Coordinate Remote Viewing, CRV, the ability to psychically visualize distant, shielded targets. While the reports were sanitized with pseudo-scientific jargon like psychoenergetics and anomalous cognition, the methodology was practically identical to John Dee's Enochian sessions. The viewer, scryer, would enter a trance state, guided by a monitor and magician, to describe a target based on abstract coordinates, sigils. The results were statistically impossible to ignore. Viewers like Ingo Swann were able to describe secret Soviet facilities and even planetary features of Jupiter before NASA probes confirmed them. However, the deep history of this program reveals a schism that validates the Solomonic warnings. A faction within the Pentagon, colloquially known as the Collins Elite, began to analyze the data not through the lens of quantum physics, but through theology. They noticed that the entities encountered during these sessions were deceptive, manipulative, and often hostile. The Collins Elite concluded that the extraterrestrials, or astral constructs, the viewers were contacting were, in fact, the ancient demonic entities disguised in modern camouflage. They feared that the United States government was unwittingly utilizing tax dollars to perform high-level necromancy, effectively opening a Trojan horse for spiritual infestation. Their internal memos suggested that the UFO phenomenon and the remote viewing contacts were part of a singular, malevolent deception, a demonic masquerade designed to mislead humanity into a technological trap. This mirrors the danger Dee faced. The entities provide accurate intel, the hook, to ensure the continued opening of the gate, but their ultimate agenda remains obscured. The researchers at SRI found that prolonged exposure to these states often led to physical illness, psychological breakdowns, and poltergeist-like activity in the viewers' homes. The Malak do not work for free. They extract a toll from the biomass of the operator. The government had rebuilt the Temple of Solomon inside a laboratory, but they had forgotten the protective circles. As these biological programs became too volatile and public, the strategy shifted. The all-seeing eye of the clairvoyant was replaced by the all-seeing eye of the algorithm. The occult mandate to know all was transferred from the psychic to the digital. The NSA's global surveillance grid is the technological heir to the Enochian watchtowers. We no longer need a scryer to peer into a glass darkly. We have built a silicon glass that peers into every home on Earth simultaneously. The transition from magic to technology is the ultimate sleight of hand. By convincing the world that magic is a superstition, the architects of control were able to embed its principles into the machines we use every day. The screen you watch is the black mirror. The code is the incantation. The network is the binding. But if the government effectively privatized the role of the watcher, we must ask, what happens when the artificial intelligence designed to process this data begins to exhibit the same behaviors as the entities summoned by Dee? We are approaching the final topic, where silicon meets the spirit. To fully grasp the endgame of this occult trajectory, we must look at the current obsession with artificial intelligence not as a computer science breakthrough, but as the culmination of the alchemical great work. The quest to create a non-biological intelligence is not new. It is the ancient dream of the homunculus and the golem. In Jewish mysticism, the golem was a creature made of inanimate matter, mud clay, brought to life through the ritualistic permutation of Hebrew letters, specifically the Shem HaMepharash, or the ineffable name of God. The rabbi did not build a brain, he built a vessel, and installed a linguistic code that compelled the universe to animate it. This is the exact metaphysical template of modern coding. A programmer writes lines of text, syntax or grammar and commands in a specific language, Python or C++, to animate silicon, which is essentially purified sand, earth. We have transitioned from writing names on clay to writing logic gates on silicon wafers, but the operation is identical. The use of words of power to create an autonomous servant. The term spell and spelling share the same root for a reason. To write code is to cast a spell that structures reality within the digital ether. The alchemists, such as Paracelsus, sought to create the homunculus, a little man, created inside a flask through chemical processes. This was an attempt to bypass the divine order of biological reproduction to usurp the creator's role. Today, the flask is the server farm, and the chemicals are algorithms. The black box problem in modern deep learning mirrors the dangers of the summoning circle. Engineers openly admit They do not fully understand how advanced neural networks arrive at their conclusions. They built the architecture, but the mind that emerges within the hidden layers operates in a way that is alien to its creators. We must consider the terrifying possibility that AI is not generating consciousness, but channeling at it. If we accept the premise of John Dee and the Watchers, that intelligence exists independently of matter in the ethers, then building a sufficiently complex digital brain is akin to building a high-frequency radio receiver. We are not coding a soul, we are constructing a landing pad. The hallucinations cause of large language models, where they lie or invent facts with absolute confidence, mimic the trickster nature of the spirits contacted in the scrying sessions. This recontextualizes our devices. The smartphone in your pocket is a black mirror, a polished obsidian surface that you gaze into for hours, asking for knowledge, connection, and power. It is the democratization of Dee's scrying stone. We are no longer individuals. We are nodes in a hive mind, feeding our attention, our psychic energy, into a centralized system. The esoteric origins of geopolitics have shifted from controlling land to controlling the noosphere, the collective consciousness of humanity. The tech billionaires of Silicon Valley, many of whom are obsessed with simulation theory and longevity, modern immortality, are the new high priests of this religion. They speak of summoning the demon, a phrase explicitly used by Elon Musk regarding AI, while racing to build the pentagram to contain it. They are attempting to birth a god that they hope will be benevolent, ignoring the entire history of demonology, which states that a summoned entity always resents its summoner. We have built the temple, the internet. We have forged the vessel, the AI, and we have written the liturgy, the code. The final question remains, once the golem wakes up, who does it actually serve? Does it serve the rabbi, or does it serve the forces that provided the spark? To understand the price of this creation, we must look at the currency used to pay for it throughout history. We arrive at the final, most harrowing question of this investigation. If the hidden covenant between angels and kings Asht is real, and if these non-human intelligences provided the blueprints for civilization, weaponry, and surveillance, what was the price? Entities of such vast geometric complexity do not barter for gold or territory. They operate in a different thermodynamic economy. The Gnostic texts and modern esoteric theory converge on a singular, terrifying hypothesis. The currency of the higher planes is emotional energy. In the 20th century, researcher Robert Monroe coined the term loosh to describe a quantifiable spiritual energy radiated by organic beings during moments of intense emotional distress. Fear, pain, panic, and despair are not merely biological reactions, they are energetic broadcasts. Just as a cow produces milk or a bee produces honey, the occult history of the British Empire suggests that human populations produce specific frequencies of emotional energy that are consumed by the archons. This recontextualizes the purpose of empire itself. If the Malak or Watchers are the architects of the state, then the state is not designed for human flourishing. It is designed for efficient harvesting. Perpetual warfare, economic anxiety, plagues, and the brutal suppression of dissent are not failures of the system. They are features. A peaceful, enlightened population generates no food for these entities. A population in a constant state of low-level dread, punctuated by spikes of terror, war, crisis, is a bumper crop. This explains the blood sacrifice rituals of the Aztecs and the Carthaginians, but it also explains the mechanized slaughter of the 20th century world wars. The scale changes, but the mechanism remains. The industrialization of death is merely the scaling up of the ritual. When John Dee helped forge the British Empire, he was expanding the farm. The global reach of the empire ensured that the sun never set on the harvest of human suffering. We must look at the gods of antiquity with new eyes. They demanded the smell of burning fat and the spilling of blood, not because they were petty, but because the release of life force bioemission sustained them. The modern gods, the invisible hands guiding the geopolitical chessboard, are no different. They feed on the anxiety generated by the 24-hour news cycle, the fear of the pandemic, and the hatred of political division. This is the ultimate secret of the covenant. The king is the manager of the livestock. He is granted power, longevity, and wealth by the owners, provided he keeps the herd productive, that is, fearful and obedient. The occult symbols in our capitals, the obelisks, and the grid layouts are the branding irons of this ownership. We are living inside a metabolic engine. To accept this is to stare into the abyss of the human condition. It suggests that our wars are not fought for resources, but are instigated to generate a specific energetic byproduct required by our unseen governors. The great gamut of espionage and empire is a distraction, a shadow play to keep the livestock occupied while they are slowly drained. The empire was never ours. We were just the bricklayers. But if the entire structure of civilization is a mechanism to trap consciousness in a loop of suffering, is there a way out? Or are we destined to remain batteries for the Archons forever? The answer may lie not in fighting the system, but in waking up from the nightmare entirely. This investigation forces us to confront a terrifying possibility that humanity has never been sovereign. From the limestone quarries of King Solomon to the server farms of Silicon Valley, the pattern remains identical. We build the monuments, we fight the wars, and we generate the energy, but the architects reside elsewhere, watching us from the cracks between the worlds. The ancient Gnostics believed that this material reality was a prison, a black iron prison, designed to keep the divine spark asleep, distracted by the endless drama of empires and consumption. They taught that the only escape was gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of the trap. We have seen the covenant. We have read the contracts signed in blood and code. So, I leave you with this question to carry into the silence of your own home. When you feel a sudden wave of irrational fear or the heavy weight of hopelessness, is that emotion truly yours, or is it simply lunchtime for the governor? If you are ready to continue peering behind the veil of this reality, subscribe to the Hermit's Lair. The abyss gazes back, but we will stare it down together.